Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Welcome, Arthi, George, Rura. You're welcome. Hi, George. Hello. Hi, Tawfiq. Still waiting for our guest. Our guest speaker for today, Arthi. So, Arthi. Hello.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello, how are you doing?
Well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good to see you.
Oh, lovely to see you too.
Okay, great. So I see some of our friends here. So I'd like to welcome everybody. So shall we start or wait a little bit for more people to join us? So what do you think, Arti?
I'm really up to you. I'm happy to start, and as people join, they can come in. Really up to you, Dr. Kais.
Okay, great. So let me start by introducing the topic, and then leaving the floor to you. Okay.
Absolutely. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. So our guest for today is Arthi Rabikrisson. She is a neuroscience coach for many leaders, Forbes Coaches Council contributor. She's a keynote speaker and the winner of the Gender Mainstream Awards of 2021. So, and she's here to introduce us to this topic, the neuro-agile leaders. So you're very welcome, Arti.
Thank you so much. And everyone, a big hello from Johannesburg, South Africa, where it is a stunningly hot day today. So I hope you can't see me sweating too much. But really, it's we're getting into summer here, so it's actually a beautiful time of the year. And wonderful to be here with all of you today. So thank you for joining, and to everyone as they come in. Love it if you could just quickly put in the chat where you're from. It'll be nice for me to understand where we're getting all the different coaches coming through to from. So yes, today I'm going to be talking about, sorry.
So no worries about the weather, because we'll be fully present with you. Don't forget everything else.
Perfect. I love it. All right. The neuro-agile leader. And you're probably wondering, what is Arthi going on about here? What is this all about? Well, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a flavor of what this actually means. And for many of us, the understanding around agility is very much in the systems and processes space, isn't it? Because we typically talk about agile organizations and agile processes and building towards agility in teams even, but that's all centered around processes and systems. And certainly from the start of COVID-19, our expectation has been that actually we need to have agile systems and people who are agile as well, in the manner with which they work, in the manner with which they problem solve, innovate. So it's coming away from the processes and the systems, and it's coming down to the individual basis as well. Now, our leaders who have always been under strain and stress and requiring a lot of things out of them, even pre-COVID, suddenly found themselves needing to do even more above and beyond, having to, pivot business models and change the way business was being done because technology needed to move significantly in order for business to still be conducted. So that was a different level of flexibility and adaptability that was needed within a very short space of time. And certainly now, as we move into a hybrid sort of formation, which is highly technologically further up the curve, let's say, with higher adoption, there's even more demands on our leaders in terms of, can we continue to be as flexible as we have since the start of COVID-19 and as the rest of the environment plays out? So, I think before I actually give you a bit of a definition around what a neuro-agile leader could look like, maybe let's start with a little bit of where have our leadership teams come through over the last few years? And that could be a little bit more meaningful then, so that we kind of figure out where are we now. And if you think about where leaders, actually started off from, it was very much at that industrial age where suddenly we had managers coming on board. There was very much an authoritative nature with which leadership was handling things. It was very much centered around control, and the manager had power within them. Things were very task-oriented, very process-driven. And you could very, very methodically sort of tick off everything that was being doing. So from a measurement perspective as well, I think it was very easy at the time to kind of say, if things are missing in the process, then obviously there's a system failure, process failure, but that's how people were measured as well, by what they were able to do from a task perspective. And of course, there was very little to no feedback about how you were doing because you had this scoring mechanism in place. Now, obviously, as time progresses, technology progressed, we came into what they now call the information age. And that's currently where we're at, but we're starting to straddle a little bit into the imagination age. So let me just focus first on the information age. And the information age is where suddenly we realize that we can't just be working with data, we actually need to transform that into knowledge. So what are we doing with all of that data? And we're asking leaders to become more visionary in how they're thinking and how they're visualizing where the future is going to be. So take somebody from the present, but build out a beautiful future of where things can be. There is a bigger focus on people. And wellness and well-being and managing people and helping them to build themselves. There's also a bit of courage involved too, right? Because you could be charting new territories as well, as we've seen, or you're pushing against the grain and pushing boundaries to do something different. We've seen so many new companies, but fairly new companies like your Ubers and Apple Technologies and how they've evolved, how they've pushed boundaries against what was kind of known and given. And of course, we've got new companies now that are doing that today at present. There's also, and maybe people don't like to hear this, but there's almost a one-way mechanism in terms of feedback as well, right? It's either coming, it's mostly, not either, but actually it's mostly coming from the top down still. There's not much bottom-up feedback coming in. So bottom-up being where employees are kind of giving feedback to your management teams. It's typically your management teams are cascading feedback down. And that's quite interesting because it's probably why we're seeing a lot of people management issues still kind of playing out in the present environment, in this remote or hybrid working environment that we're moving into. Now, Sylvia Damiano, who actually came up with this framework, is saying, but guys, we're actually shifting even beyond the information age now, and we're moving into what she calls the neuro leader who's in the imagination age. And it's partly from that visionary perspective of leaders, of what they're being asked to do, but it's almost saying that knowledge is not enough because we've got fantastic sources and databases that do that, like your Google and all of your search engines that can, at the touch of a button, bring up whatever information you need, can even bring up the knowledge thoughts that come up behind it from all of your research and peer-reviewed papers. What we're asking our leaders for now is for ideas. We want them to actually be able to generate things that are almost, we want to put pie in the sky in a way. But obviously, it's also about what is the plan to get there. And we're starting to see some of these come through, like, the Tesla programs, the space programs that are coming out now. What is possible in this imagination age? You can see there's some of the other things around being a creator, being very much in your mind, because obviously that's where you're generating ideas. We're also asking leaders to be more vulnerable. I mean, we don't want to have leaders who are sort of telling us one-way feedback and not showing us how they are showing up as humans. We're asking our leaders to show us that they're people too, that they can be vulnerable, because that level of empathy builds psychological safety and trust. There's also that element of, and sorry, I didn't cover it before, about how a manager going to an information age leader, going to an imagination age leader is moving around what knowledge do they have. It went from I know to a collaborative we know to now the unknown. Who knows? We're going to be charting new territory in some of these places. So there's that big sort of question mark around how do I manage that? How do I manage not knowing the unknown from a self-management perspective for a leader? And of course, as we're going on in terms of, for example, SDGs, as we're thinking about the broader humanitarian collective of things that we do in our world, we're starting to need to get feedback from different areas. So it's not just internal to the organization, it's not just from key stakeholders here and there, it's actually a complete 360 direction feedback that we're suddenly getting inputs from. And as a leader who's driving an organization, if you're discounting any particular segment of feedback, it could be to your detriment. So, there's a lot more now that's required from a neuro leader who's moving into this age of groundbreaking creativity, but also being quite vulnerable in the space that they're in at this point in time. And, maybe that shifts quite nicely then into what I and many others in the space of neuroscience are starting to realize, that if we're so much in our head in terms of creation and idea generation, then clearly we need to be ensuring that that primary tool that we're using to do that is actually upskilled massively, our brain, right? And that's what I mean when I talk about neuroscience specifically. It's actually the brain and the nervous system. That's what it's the study of. And our brain, we don't actually stop to think about it consciously. It's doing fantastic things. As we're sitting here, you're listening to me, your brain is processing everything I'm saying and the manner with which I'm saying it. And you're having a reaction, you're thinking about what I'm saying, you're processing it in your head, and maybe you're liking or you're not liking what I'm saying, but there's a whole host of things going on with you at this point in time. This is our competitive advantage, our brain. It's about how we actually go about stimulating it so that it can be in peak performance to actually be able to problem solve effectively, critically think, create, communicate, whole host of things. I've just named a few. And one of the things that we want to do is build out that agility with the brain, hence the term neuro-agility, because we're living in a VUCA world, right? It's unpredictable, it's volatile, it's all of these good things. And this is becoming our secret ingredient to help us navigate this, because we're going to be looking at all the different areas with which we can get input and almost take that and create something unique from the way with which we deploy a solution or deploy the way in which we actually collaborate. It's a unique signature profile for us. So neuro-agility in a nutshell is actually talking about the brain's ability to learn quickly, to learn easily, to think clearly, to learn and draw conclusions, and also to be quite flexible in moving across the understandings, the ideas that we generate, and you actually maximize the potential of the experience that you're having at any given point in time. And more importantly, you want to be able to manage stressful situations, coping with stress, one of the biggest things that we all need to be doing, not just leaders, but coping with conflict, stress-ridden situations, and your ability to then stretch yourself to be able to maneuver it well is the key part around developing neuro-agility. And you'll see I've put in a few markers there around how one out-creates, out-learns, and out-thinks the competition. Because ultimately it becomes a bit of a race, isn't it? In certain instances. I myself, I'm a big proponent of co-opetition as opposed to competition. So competition gets you to a certain level, but co-opetition actually helps you break barriers. And that's where I think we ultimately need to get to. But yeah, this just gives you a bit of a marker of building out neuro-agility helps you become more adaptable, helps you use your brain in a holistic way, not just with dominant spheres. And I'll speak to that in a little bit more way. But ideally, thinking about new things in new ways, that out of the box thinking that we typically talk about. So I've kind of covered this a little bit more, but maybe let me explain it to you a bit better using Noel Birch's 4 stages of competence. And I know some of you will be quite familiar with this. You've used this before. But over time, this has actually been refined to actually now include 2 other areas beyond unconsciously competency that you would have necessarily. And I'm not going to go into each specific detail, but I've done a little bit of a write-up there of what each one sort of means. And we start, at that point where we're unconsciously incompetent, that state of ignorance, right? And over time, if we actually put effort into learning, developing, and growing, we start to move firstly down the curve of learning, right? We become, we know that we don't know something, so it's brought to our attention. And then at that point of knowing that we don't know something, there's 2 things we could do. We could decide, and again, this is a brain activity, we decide, I don't think this is necessary for me to work on anymore, so I discard doing anything, or I need to do something because I feel this is going to benefit me and I need to intervene to do something. And that's where the red part of the curve comes in, because there's that little bit of frustration and hesitation around, where am I going to go with this? No one knows. So that's why sometimes we move back up the curve because we don't necessarily want to put any work into it. Other times we're actually taking that dip. We're getting into a frustration zone as we start to actually learn a bit more about what we don't know. We may hit a bit of a roadblock, but if we persevere, that's when we start moving up the curve again and we start to become consciously competent. And of course, when we're at that stage, we're obviously now saying, oh, I know how to do this. I've learned something new. I've built up a competency in this, but obviously it still needs concentration. What we're trying to do is to get to those levels that are higher up, unconsciously competent, mastery, and artistry. And that comes with dedicated focus. That is where you're doing something so habitually, you don't need to concentrate on it. It's second nature because you know it. Mastery is being able to actually explain it to others. So, you would have people who are masters in their field. They know exactly what it is, but they can actually show you and teach you how to do it. That's the level of mastery that we're talking about. And artistry is, it's almost become self-explanatory in terms of what you're doing. So you actually are explaining it without words, but it's so evident for everyone to see that you're an artist in that particular area. And that, as I'm reiterating, takes time. Now, when you're building out your neuro-agility, your ability to stretch your brain as a leader, you actually can move up that curve towards unconsciously competent, mastery, and artistry. Because what you're actually doing is you're developing your talent towards that because you're putting dedicated focus. And when something is brought to your consciousness, you're actually becoming more self-aware about who you are, what your likes are, what your dislikes are, where your natural intelligence preferences lie, all of those good things. And by doing that, you suddenly realize, okay, I need to optimize what I'm doing here. And how am I going to do that? I'm going to do it through new learning and development, through training, through greater self-awareness, a whole host of different interventions that actually help to optimize your brain's performance. And when you start to do that, you're changing the way, the structure and the nature of your brain, and you're accelerating your learning and your decision-making in that time. One of the biggest ones that I like, and I always put this out there with leaders and with people that I'm coaching is it's actually such a great way for us to identify and minimize our risk for error, because we all have it. We all have a blind spot, or many blind spots, actually. Let's be realistic. And sometimes, as with a blind spot, you're in the unconsciously incompetent state. You don't know that you have a blind spot. But through self-awareness, you actually suddenly realize, oh my goodness, this is something that I've missed. And with that, you start to realize, well, what are the errors that I could have been making because I was not aware of it? And that helps you then to actually work to minimize what's happening from an error perspective. Now, can you imagine being able to do that in a work environment, to say that I'm minimizing my error in that space? Oh, sorry, I could hear someone talking there. Is that is that all right?
No, go ahead.
Okay, cool, no problem. Yeah, so imagine in the workspace being able to actually say, you know, I've identified this because I've recognized a blind spot, and actually this could have cost us a lot of money, but now that I'm aware of this, or I've probed and been more curious about this, we've identified a potential area or weakness that we wouldn't have before. That can actually cause massive savings for a company and de-risk a company's profile. And that comes from an individual level, right? That level of ideas, that level of thinking is not at an organizational level, it's at the individual level. So this is quite important. As you're going into your self-awareness and improving that, you're actually improving your levels of happiness. Now, who doesn't want to be happy? We all do, right? So, you know, knowing what you love and knowing what you enjoy and actually focusing on that in terms of how you work, in terms of how you do things, automatically it's going to increase your happiness. And who doesn't want a fulfilled life? As a leader, when you're showing up with your vulnerability and showing people you have that human connection, you're actually building that psychological trust with them. And they start to feel more motivated as a result of, I see what my leader is going through, or they've had a similar situation, but they're helping to empower me in my space. They build that loyalty and they engage more. They increase their levels of performance as well. It's a whole ripple effect. And of course, the one key one that I mentioned earlier, to be able to manage stress and also extreme fatigue. I mean, we're seeing in the environment we're in now, people are burned out. We're talking about Zoom fatigue. Here we are doing a Zoom webinar. People are Zoom fatigued. They don't know how to deal with this, having back-to-back meetings online or still having now to rush to face-to-face meetings. So how do you ensure that you're still feeling as fresh as you were a few hours ago when you woke up? There's ways and there's ways and possibilities to do that as you build out your level of agility in your brain. One of the key ways of doing this, of actually building out that neuro-agility, is actually what we call bilateral thinking. Now, bilateral thinking, and I'll go into a little bit of detail about this in one of my follow-up slides, but it basically helps us understand the two core hemispheres that we typically talk about when we talk about the brain, either the left hemisphere or the right hemisphere. Sorry, and I'm doing it in my view. This is my left and my right. Obviously, yours will be swapped around. But each hemisphere does something different, right? So your left hemisphere is, as you can see from the graphic, something that's very finance or science or even academically related. It's very logical, very detailed, facts-oriented. There's a lot of structure and planning involved, quite task-oriented, right? So you want to do things systematically. Language is quite important because you're listening for words and instructions and how things should be played out. It can be quite systematic and theoretical. So there's that very, very strong component in your left hemisphere that does all of that rationalization for you. The right hemisphere of your brain is more visual. It's more focusing on motor, visual, spatial skills, things around sports, painting, you know, these creative pursuits. So very creatively inclined, holistic, a bit more on the emotion side as well. So you'll find sometimes there's spontaneity in terms of decision making, in terms of doing things. There's quite a big people element there as well because of the emotional attachment that comes through. People who tend to dominate using their right hemisphere also learn through pictures. So as I mentioned, quite visual, and typically believe that they can multitask. And let me tell you, multitasking is a myth. So I don't know if I'm breaking anyone's bubbles with that, but multitasking is not really a thing. It's actually switch tasking. And you would have read some really good literature out there on that now. Now, why am I bringing this to you? Because what typically happens is we tend to be very dominant in one hemisphere of our brain when we're starting to process stimuli. What does that mean? So, for example, if I use myself as the example, I'm quite balanced in terms of how I approach anything that's coming to me, any sensory input or something that my brain needs to analyze. But I'm slightly more dominant on the right-hand side of my brain. So, for example, if Dr. Kais is talking to me, my dominant right hemisphere is the first one that will start to process the information that he's sharing with me. And I start to think in pictures very quickly. My brain then very quickly switches over to the left-hand side or the left hemisphere. And that helps me to start now rationalizing and processing. And this happens quickly, I mean, milliseconds. I mean, so it's not a case of this is switching on slowly and this is, and then, that's not what I'm talking about. We're talking about which is the dominant one that prefers to come forth ahead of switching very quickly to the next. And our brain does this switching very, very quickly. But having that preference to do the first or dominant brain, that the hemisphere of the brain that comes through, means that potentially in those first milliseconds, we're missing out the other less dominant part of the brain in terms of processing. And that's what's called homolateral thinking. Because you've got the dominant hemisphere that comes first, it means you're potentially missing out on information that the other less dominant hemisphere could have actually taken in at that first case. So the case for neuro-agility is actually to build out bilateral thinking. And bilateral thinking means the ability for both your left and your right hemispheres of your brain, when receiving sensory input, both are switched on at the same time. So there's no slowness in terms of problem solving, in terms of thinking, in terms of creating. It's taking everything in from the creativity to the rational side of things and forming an opinion, a behavior, a solution, whatever the case may be. And we've seen this with a number of thinkers that we even know today that are highly bilateral in that space, like your Sir Richard Branson, your Elon Musk, Steve Jobs as well. Very bilateral in terms of thinking, but then there were other components and other traits that come into play as well, because obviously our brain is quite complex in many ways. But I just wanted to show this to you in terms of, we will always have a combination. So I just want to reiterate this. We will always have the whole brain looking at something, but we dominate with which one tackles the stimuli first. And our goal here is to ensure that actually that whole brain is tackling the stimuli, both hemispheres together, because that's when we're getting that ease, that speed, and that flexibility coming through with how we actually process information. Now, this also comes down to a little bit around, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, the ideology of having a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, right? And there's a few components here, as you can see in the graphic that I've put in there, about what a fixed mindset entails versus what a growth mindset entails. And the whole idea behind neuro-agility is actually migrating away from the fixed mindset towards that more open growth mindset. And it's almost creating that bridge of curiosity between the two. So a fixed mindset would typically say, I'm set in my ways. This is how we need to do it. I'm going to stick with what I know because the known is safe. But once one starts to build out that level of curiosity of, well, what could be out there? What's the unknown, as I mentioned earlier? One starts to open up the chasm of thinking around, I could embrace something new. Yes, it's scary. Yes, it's unknown, but I'm opening myself to maybe some different perspectives. I'm getting different feedback from all of those different stakeholders that I mentioned as well. And we're starting to get perspectives that are opening up my mindset to different opportunities, different challenges, but also different opportunities to problem solve, to grow, to create. and to fashion something that's actually completely you. So, I guess what I'm saying with this, everyone, is...
So I'd like to ask you about your preference, but I'd like to get the questions meanwhile or by the end of the session. So what do you prefer?
Let's do it at the end, because then at least you would have heard everything that I'm talking about. And then I'll happily take the questions. It's just a few more slides, so I'm not going to be too much longer.
Great.
Yeah. Is that, if that's cool with everyone, yeah?
Go ahead.
Okay. All right, cool. Okay, so as I was saying, it's a pretty simple formula. You want to have a positive attitude, because that positive attitude is going to consistently bring you positive outcomes. And it's predominantly because of what your brain does. Like I said, with stimuli, it creates associations with both negative and positive stimuli. So if your brain is habitually creating, resiliency towards negative states, then it means that you're actually building out your ability to cope with stress, to cope with anxiety, and even possibly to the very difficult stages of depression, and which nobody really wants to go into. So, putting yourself into that positive mind frame helps you to actually handle positive associations and negative associations well. And you actually challenge yourself towards more pleasing outcomes. In that way. And most people who have a very positive attitude and a growth mindset actually say, I found meaning, I found purpose in what I'm doing, and I'm learning, and I'm loving learning. So that's quite important as well. And the great thing is, if you didn't know, now you will know, is we have the ability to change. This wonderful idea that our brain is plastic. Plastic means it's able to change. You can teach an old dog new tricks. Very possible. That's what we're talking about here. We're changing some of those unproductive habits, and we're creating new ones that actually help you get to better outcomes. And here, this diagram just very easily shows you things around how you can change the structure a little bit on the scientific side. But the whole objective here is you create that awareness, you're moving up the learning curve, as I mentioned. And as you're putting those interventions in, your very plastic brain is starting to actually change the way it's thinking, opening up those synapses, making new connections, strengthening the new ones, particularly if you keep doing and habitually keep creating that change and doing it and repeating it. You're strengthening that particular synapse in that specific knowledge, and you're moving further up the learning curve towards unconscious competence, mastery, and artistry. So it's very, very possible for us to do this, everyone. And of course, if all of this is possible, how do we start? Where do we go? What is the roadmap? I mean, we've read so much, right? Even I read so many different things about which way we need to go. How do I become a leader who's going to begin this journey of neuro-agility? The good thing is you're already at the starting point, and you have been. Now we're bringing it to your level of consciousness, let's put it that way. And now that it's coming to consciousness, it means that we can actually take some interventions to figure out, where are you now, and what could actually help you, or you as a leader, to actually grow and take it from there. And very simply, there's three things that I say to people to look at. Three questions that you kind of need to look at in terms of beginning this journey towards neuroagility. Firstly, get an understanding of how your brain works. I don't think many of us knew it. I certainly didn't. I'm learning. I'm still learning. And what I love about this is we're still learning about the brain, because it's such a complex organ. Nobody has said we know exactly what this is about. We know exactly what the brain is doing, because there's so many interconnections in terms of the functions that it performs for the body, as well as with the thinking framework. So, what I'm saying here is to have almost a high level overview of where different things in your brain actually sit and where does it work. The second question is, now that I kind of understand what the structure of the brain is, what is my unique design? What is my unique neurophysiological design? How is my specific brain unique to how I process the world? And there are tools and measurements with which to do that. And then the third question is, knowing all of this, what can I do and how can I become more agile or flexible so that I can move forward in terms of what I need to do. So, this is very easily Googled, right? And I just put a quick graphic that was posted in The Economist here, where they very simply sort of mapped out key areas in your brain along with what it sort of controls. Now, remember, this is just a snapshot 2D picture. The 3 or 4D version of this is going to show you all the interconnections, which, possibly over time we'll learn, but unfortunately, we're not going to learn it all in one go. But it gives you a sense of where in different parts of the brain, different things are sitting and things that we kind of understand. And based on what I'm talking about as well, for example, where does problem solving sit? Where is my body awareness sitting? Where does my level of consciousness sit? Or where does my memory sit? That at least helps you map out where exactly things are going on in your brain, right? So that is the first question. How does my brain work? On the second one, it's about, well, how unique is my brain? So how is this brain of mine wired? How is it making sense of my world? Now, I use a specific measurement tool, and there's a few of them that are out there. The one that I use is called a neuro-agility profile assessment, and it measures 7 different components of a brain structure to help one understand how is this brain functioning. So firstly, it would look at the left and the right hemisphere. Which hemisphere are you dominant with? It would then map the front and the back of the brain as well. Those are your expressive and receptive areas of the brain. In other words, do you verbalize more or do you internalize more when you're taking in information? So then you've suddenly got 4 quadrants of your brain that you've kind of mapped out, which is quite nice. Then there's also the sensory preferences, which goes internally into the brain. How are you making sense of all of the sensory inputs? Do you prefer hearing more, visual more, touching more? So that helps one understand that. Then we also need to understand, how do we deal with emotions? Are we somebody who feels the emotion? Are we somebody who actually prefers to kind of observe and we're more rational? We want to cut the emotion out. I just want to deal with the facts and figures. Now you can see there's interrelatedness here between rational feeling and also rational thinking on the left hemisphere of your brain. So as I mentioned, this is interconnectedness, but I guess with any measurement, they're just trying to break down a little component to try and give us a bit of a sense of how things work. Those are some of it. Then, for example, there would be how do I naturally prefer things? What are my intelligence preferences? And this is actually based on work by Howard Gardner in the 1960s, who came up with this. And he mapped up to, I think, 9, but now there's 11 intelligence preferences. And I remember when I read this, I was just mind blown, because we typically look at IQ and possibly EQ as the 2 predominant ones, right? But to know that there's 9 others that we could potentially be excelling at, I mean, that just, like I said, blew my mind. So it varies from IQ to EQ to kinesthetic intelligence, to sensory intelligence, to musical intelligence, and there's more. So it's wonderful for us to kind of understand. For example, I ended up being quite musically intelligent, and actually my background when I started off in my career was very technical. I was very numbers oriented, very finance IQ oriented tasks. So it was quite interesting for me to see how actually my natural preference is musically inclined, and not necessarily playing a musical instrument. I do play, but that's not actually the focus of it, for example. It's actually more around, how does one listen to music? How does one listen to rhythms, to vibrations, to tone, to pitch, the underlying around music, making sense of music and sound. So that's quite interesting to understand. And when you understand these sort of preferences, everyone, what leads to the happiness is actually if you actually practice what you're really loving doing. So if someone is, for example, let's use the musical one again, but you're doing things that actually include musical elements in your everyday life, you're going to feel actually motivated and enthused to continue doing what you're doing. The happiness factor increases. So those are the sort of things that would then, in an assessment form, can help you understand, how is my brain wired and how is it functioning now? And this is important for me to understand, because then the next step is, well, how do I then build out who I am from a neuro-agile perspective, so that I'm using all of this information and increasing my flexibility, increasing my ability to communicate well, increasing my ability to problem solve and create, and all those beautiful things that I mentioned earlier. And, there's sort of seven key things in that I've mentioned here. And it starts obviously firstly with self-awareness, right? So getting to know yourself is sort of the bedrock of everything. We spend a lot of time saying to people, you need to take a little bit of time for self-care. You need to understand where you're at, what you're feeling, reflect, write in journals, all of that good stuff. It's important. And especially in this COVID environment, even more so for us to understand. So finding ways to build out your self-awareness through assessments or readings or whatever the case may be, first part. The second part is linked to the homolateral, bilateral sort of growth that we want to achieve in our brain that I mentioned earlier. And this can actually be achieved very simply through doing brain training exercises. There's so many apps around that, right? Very easily download an app that very quickly, you could play a game, it's stretching your thinking. And what you don't actually realize is it's actually helping your brain to become more bilateral in time. So it's something as simple as that. Enhancing one's critical thinking. Now, people, let me just go back there. People sort of wonder, well, how does one go about doing that? I thought I'm a critical thinker. And it's actually a very simple way of doing it. And it's something that I think coaches worldwide use, and you would know this, Dr. Kais, but it's Socratic questioning, right? It's the asking of the why, right? And if we're actually doing that with everything that we're doing, we start challenging our brain to think a little bit deeper, to probe a little bit deeper. So that curiosity with which we approach life, just by asking a simple why, is actually one of the ways that we can start to build out critical thinking even more. Building our resiliency to stress, so important, because, and I don't know if many of you know this, but when you're under extreme stress or when you're extremely tired, parts of your brain actually switch off. So, if you're facing a specific situation, the dominant parts of your brain that would be stimulated and would want to process the information first are the ones that go into overdrive. So parts of your brain actually stop functioning because you're trying to focus on the stressful information that's coming through to you and you're trying to make sense of it. And sometimes you feel like, oh my goodness, I can't move. I've got a bit of a brain fog, or I'm just sitting with not knowing what to do. That is what stress ends up doing. It actually stops you from performing at your peak. So building out ways to be more resilient to stress, knowing how to deal with the demands that are coming to you, knowing how to find ways to control it better. These are things and different ways people can look at it, from exercise, from specific sports and things like that, just even from doing different interventions like assessments, bringing awareness through to it, even putting yourself into stressful situations to try and figure out a way to deal with it. People do different things to build up resiliency, but it's important. It's important to do it. Something simple that we should know, the food that we intake. Obviously, all of the nutrients end up in our brain along with everywhere else in our bloodstream. But, we want to maximize what we're eating to give our brain the opportunity to perform at peak performance. So a healthy diet is important. Similarly, exercise and body movement stimulates oxygen flow, stimulates blood flow, and all of that's going into the brain. And the more you're giving to the brain, the more it's able to actually divert to all parts of your body, helps you to think, helps you to do things. So simple concepts, but makes a whole lot of sense in terms of optimizing your brain's performance. And then one that I've already mentioned is building out ways to build out that mindset shift, building out away from a fixed mindset towards that growth mindset. And that's things, sometimes it's simply, as I said, linked possibly to the Socratic questioning around the why and how do we move across from that. So, and I always leave people with this question, and this is obviously from Jim Collins, the big, hairy, audacious goals. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. Just to kind of help you get thinking about a bit more of self-awareness around where you are at this point in time, a bit of a reflection, and taking on board what I've just said at this point in time. So he asks 3 questions in his book, Built to Last, it's called Successful Habits of a Visionary Company. And he always asks leaders about this. What are you deeply passionate about? What drives your economic engine? And what can you be the best in the world at? And when you intersect the answers to that, you come up with this big, hairy, audacious goal that you want to be striving for. And it's a goal that everyone should be striving for, no matter, well, we call it big, but it could be big or small. We can use the terminology interchangeably there. But the idea behind it is what is my ultimate goal and outcome that I want to achieve? And how can I actually intervene so that I'm setting myself up to be more neuro-agile to do it and to achieve it. You could easily follow. I know he's created a 1-page strategic plan, but even we can do it just on a page and outline it. But hopefully, some of the key thoughts that I've shared with you here is going to trigger some of those for you. And it'll be interesting now to hear some of your thoughts, some of your comments, and to take some questions on that front. So yeah, absolutely. I'd love for us to get into it, Dr. Kais, with some of the chats.
Thank you, Arthi. Thank you for this brilliant presentation. So the floor is yours. My plans to interact with our guest speaker. So if you have any question, please go ahead. Just activate the mic and share your thoughts, comments, and ask questions if you want. Go ahead.
Yes, hello.
Hello, Mir.
Yes, this is Mirna. Hi, Arthi. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. I had a question regarding when you were talking about the both hemispheres of the brain, and when something happens, like what is the way, you said multitasking is not possible in most cases. So how does the brain shift from the left to the right to analyze the data in a factual way as well as in a creative way? How does this happen?
Okay, yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Myrna. Wonderful question. So let me first tackle that first point about what I said, multitasking is a bit of a myth. And I used to say this myself. I would say, I'm so good at multitasking because I've got like 20 things to do, and I feel like I'm accomplishing all of them because I'm doing a little bit here, doing a little bit there. But what I didn't realize was I was not really completing any of them in any shape or fashion. And I typically find that this is true for a lot of people. We feel like we're doing many things at once, but actually we can only focus on one thing at a time. So for example, if I had my phone ringing now and I'm trying to present to you, it's going to be very difficult for me to talk on the phone and talk to you, right? But in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm taking a call and I'm presenting, I'm multitasking. I'm actually not. I'm going to give up being able to speak to you because I need to listen to my phone and then respond. So that's a very, very simple way of analogizing what I mean around multitasking. Our brain actually can only focus clearly on one thing. And we tend to forget that when we don't focus on doing one thing well, we don't actually complete it to the level with which we would want to complete it. And that's why sometimes we actually set ourselves up for failure here, unfortunately, right? Because I know I set high expectations of what I'm able to deliver to anybody. And if I don't do it to that, I suddenly feel, oh, I'm feeling rushed, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm just going to put something out there. It's not my best effort, but I'm doing it just to get it done. Versus if I'd actually said, I'm spending half an hour, I'm not going to look at anything else. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to move to the next one. I'm actually going to feel more confident and better at what I'm doing. So that's where the whole idea around multitasking is a myth. And when you feel as if you are multitasking, what you're actually doing is switch tasking. That means I'm shifting my focus from doing a presentation to answering my phone to suddenly the printer's going and I need to fetch something from the printer, whatever the case may be, but I'm switching very quickly. Now, the brain goes into sensory overload when you're multitasking or trying to multitask. And that actually slows down your performance. So that's what's going on in the brain, Myrna. We're saying to our brain, okay, you need to talk. Now you need to listen. Now you need to do another thing, maybe fetch something. And in many cases, when it needs dedicated attention, that's when it trips your brain up. And suddenly you feel like, oh, I'm feeling overwhelmed. because the brain, and for a lot of us, we tend to be homolateral, as I mentioned. So that switching that you're asking about happens very quickly, but when you've got sensory overload, it actually slows down the process even more. So I remember when I was still working in financial services, and suddenly I had all these demands that needed to happen at the same time because everything becomes urgent. And suddenly I would feel like I was paralyzed. I didn't know where to start with something. My brain actually started to slow down, even though I know I'm in a normal scenario. I worked very well doing whatever tasks I needed, but under that stress and overwhelm, my brain slowed down and I couldn't even fathom where should I start first. So that's what I'm talking about when it talks to multitasking, task switching, the brain switching in normal circumstances very quickly between the left and right hemisphere, but under extreme stress and fatigue, where you're doing tasks that needs a lot of focus and concentration, it actually slows down your performance. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you so much. And I had one more question so what you said is more of bringing awareness to the brain, like the brain being aware and conscious that multitasking is not possible. So once we're aware of that, we can focus on each task by itself.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. And there's certain things, I mean, so just to get a little deeper into the science of it. So, there's two areas in our brain where we're either doing fast thinking or we're doing slow thinking as well, right? And the easiest way to say which one we're doing is the fast thinking is things that you do almost automatically because you've created habits, patterns, and routines that allow you to do it almost without thinking. An example of that would be if you're going to your nearest supermarket, right? You've been there 100, if not 1,000 times. How many times have you landed up at the supermarket and figured out, oh, how did I get here? I'm here, but I wasn't consciously thinking about it because I know the route. I know my brain knows it. It's fast thinking, and I got there, and that was the end goal. That would be fast thinking. Slow thinking, on the other hand, is quite deliberate. It's that concentration. It's actually saying to your brain, hello, you need to put some attention here because you've got this deadline or something to figure out, and you're concentrating, and your brain now has to process what's in front of it. That requires slower thought, which helps you to build out a solution or work through the challenge that you're dealing with. So that's where all different parts of the brain become activated to solve the challenge or build out the opportunity. And that's the slow thinking mechanism. So with neuro-agility, you're moving some of the slow thinking elements over time to become very productive, fast thinking as well, because it's new productive habits, but initially it's going to feel slow. And like I mentioned to you on that curve of the stages of learning, slow thinking is typically in that red part. It can be very uncomfortable. We get frustrated because we don't know the answers, and sometimes you just want to give up. That feeling is when you're at that stage. But when you persevere and you break through, then you start to move up the curve towards those other levels of learning. It becomes easier, it becomes habitual.
Yes, thank you. I had one more question, if the time allows. I'm not sure.
Happy? Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned the growth mindset. Is it the same as the flux mindset, or it's different? Because I've been hearing a lot about the flux mindset. If you can tell me more about that. Thank you.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, the growth mindset is really just, and for me, that's the key one. And I suppose the flux mindset is sort of a subset of that as well. But I guess for the purposes of our discussion today, the idea that I want to get across here is by building out levels of conscious awareness, we're starting to then think about this unknown area or unknown perspectives that we haven't looked at before. And we're sort of challenging ourselves to say, okay, how can I actually look at this and how can I tackle this? And just by doing that, you're already moving away from a fixed mindset. Because remember, a fixed mindset means I don't want to look at it. I don't want to consider other perspectives. I'm just going to do what I know, do what I'm used to, do to the known. The growth mindset is sort of, I'm open to ideas and I want to kind of look at it. Whether I do it is a different story. Whether I execute is a different story. But the fact that I'm open to the idea is facilitating growth. And then with the flux mindset, it's sort of saying, okay, how fluid do I want to be in this space now? So that's why I kind of say maybe it's a bit of a subset of it. But yeah, I hope that gives you a high level look at it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Myrna, for interacting with us. So let's see if we have another question. So I see a question on the chat box. So
yeah.
Josephine, she's saying, are there significant differences in the brain function with different genders?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. You know, and I suppose there is studies that show that, and you know, we would have heard this anecdotally in terms of how women tend to be more feeling oriented, more emotional, right? And sometimes that's used to our detriment, particularly in the workplace, right? Because the expectation is that there's less emotion in the workplace, or there's less emotion in a leader that's needed. It's a sign of strength in some cases. I'm very glad to see that that's moving away now. But you know, I think the overriding thing here is that our signature in terms of how our brain works and how our brain processes is unique to each of us, whether we're male or female. So, you know, I would never want to bucket it into a gender thing, because that doesn't serve any purpose. We want people to show up authentically as who they are, no matter being man, woman, or anything else. So, you know, I think the whole point around this, Josephine, is that if we know where our unique signature lies, and remember this also, that the dominance that we display with our processing hemispheres actually is genetic, right? So it comes from our parents, our mothers and fathers, as well as our grandparents, our maternal and paternal grandparents. So our way of the way we're biologically designed is through genetic traits passed down from that way. Thankfully, as I mentioned, we can change the structure of our brain, meaning that, you know, even though you may have genetically been a right-hand side hemisphere dominant person, you will still be that, but the manner in which you actually use that changes over time. So you can actually change being dominant in one space to becoming more bilateral and evenly using both sides of it. There's interventions that we can do to actually make it more productive for ourselves. And I think that's the more important thing, that awareness that we can develop from where we started to get to something even better and greater for our own success, for our own sense of fulfillment as well.
Okay, great. Thank you, Arthi. And maybe I may add something here quickly. So leadership, there are mainly two types of leadership. We call them the transformational leadership and the transactional leadership. And the transformational leadership is really people-oriented. And commonly in science, it's really commonly accepted that this is mostly women leadership styles. So they focus on people, their feelings, yes. they how they create the groups work together. Yes. So it's really it subscribes in the long term, and the transactional leadership is really task oriented. So it's mainly for the men leadership style. So now we're approaching the end of our session, and my last question to you, Arthi, if you don't mind, so is the following. So suppose I'm a leader and you're approaching me to pitch the neuro-agile leadership style. So in few words, so what would you say to really get me into that leadership style?
Absolutely. You know, and here's the thing, I mean, I wouldn't even say it's a style, because it's not even that. And I completely understand what you're talking about from the transactional and the transformational styles of leadership. I almost want to say it's that this is the final frontier of building out your critical success factor as a leader. Because as time has passed, other things, transactional ways of leading, and even to a level and to a degree, transformational ways of leading have taken us up to this point. How do we go beyond? And how do we actually understand that we need to live in a world that needs to be not only humanly connected, but is advancing what we're trying to achieve as a human race. So it's taking us almost to another level, Dr. Case. And the only building block that we have left beyond robots and artificial intelligence, of course, is our unique signature and what we can do to uplift that. Now, we've done work at the personality level, at the behavior level, even at the values level to try and figure out who we are. We haven't figured out our brain signatures yet. And yet that is where the most power can be unlocked. Because when you do that, the opportunities are endless. So that's how I would pitch it to somebody who's looking to scale even beyond what we've just mentioned to a new dimension of leadership that includes the people elements, that expands on the creativity element and the innovation element, but at the same time takes a very human connectedness and almost a community society level to it as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Practically, how do I apply that, not leadership style or traits? So that's that philosophy. Let's say that that's philosophy, that approach. Practically, if I am a leader, so how am I going to apply?
I get it. Yeah, it's deliberate, absolutely deliberate. And, it's almost following that 7-step plan that I mentioned in my presentation. Firstly, you need to know who you are, right? And you can do something like a neuro-agile profile assessment or any of the other neuro-based assessments that are out there. There's a couple of them available, but know who you are right now, right? That's the first thing. The second thing you want to understand is, especially based on the outputs that you get from that, is what are my big, hairy, audacious goals that I want to work on? Knowing what my sensory preference is, what my style of work is, what my natural intelligence preference is. And then from there, working with specific interventions with a coach, with training, with learning and development that will directly impact those. And, you could actually put this over at least, I would say, a minimum of a 12-month program to kind of then assess, because you can do the measurement at the end as well to see how you're building out your agility. To assess, but then it becomes an iterative process. And to be honest, once you get started on it, practically starting to do interventions, you actually start to feel the difference. You start to notice things more clearly. It becomes on the ground sort of consciousness of what's happening to you and how you're showing up as a leader beyond what feedback you might be getting from others. It becomes quite powerful. So it's noticeable. And very practically, it's simple things, as I mentioned in the presentation, that you start to do. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you, Arthi. So if you don't mind, so last question from Josephine, and then we wrap up. So she says, how may we train our brains to counter the natural fight-flight system in us to better manage crises and acute changes?
Yes. Look, and remember that fight, flight, or freeze is your reptilian brain, right? That is the corest part of you in terms of the signals that you're receiving. And that is when your body and your mind more is feeling threatened. When there's an alert signal that's going out to your body that's saying, goodness, something doesn't feel right here. And most of the time we forget this, it's from our gut. Our gut is getting a sense, and this is one of our sensory inputs that we downplay a lot of the time. Our gut is giving us a sense that something's not right, or something is an opportunity, so depending which way you want to look at it. Now, that level of awareness that you start to build out about yourself actually allows you to sort of analyze that. And remember that flight, fight, or freeze is also bringing back past memories of experiences you've had, where your brain puts all of the different inputs together, comes up with a pattern, digs deep into your memories and experiences, and brings out something that you would say, here, you need to take this because something similar has happened to you before. I'm putting it very, very simplistically in your mind here, but it's actually then going back a little bit to say, if there's negative emotions attached to that experience, we actually need to alter and separate the experience from the emotion and be able to, going forward, change that emotion to be more productive. So when your brain does go back into the experience, it doesn't derail you and put you into a very difficult state, but it actually helps you to harness what you learned to be able to deal with things going forward. So it's a process, it's a journey, but there's simple steps that we can start with to try and get onto that path. And it's best to work with somebody who is, who's worked with this before, Josephine. But certainly just asking the questions is the most important thing. It's the start of the journey.
Okay, great. So thank you, Arthi. So with this, we come to the end of our webinar. So I'd like to thank everybody who came and attended this webinar. And first and foremost, I'd like to thank our guest speaker for this deep, insightful presentation. So thank you, Arthi. So with your permission, I'd like to everybody to upload with me. Arthi, thank you all, and hope to see you soon in another webinar. So goodbye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for the beautiful questions and for listening. Appreciate it. Please do connect with me on LinkedIn or anywhere else. Love to meet you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kais.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye, Josephine. Bye.